What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about Thunderbolts, #1 by Jim Zub and Sean Isaacs. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down who is on the new Thunderbolts roster and what their capabilities are. We're also going to be talking about why Hawkeye wasn't Luke Cage's first pick to lead the Thunderbolts, as well as why Luke Cage cannot be on the team himself. And we're also going to talk about whether or not America Chavez's powers are back, and why Hawkeye's recent Freefall comic is coming back to bite him in a major way.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so first and foremost, this new Thunderbolts team, the reason why it exists is, well, for one, it's a government installation. It's something that's been around since the late 90s, a superhero team that was actually super villains in disguise. We had characters like Baron Zemo, Moonstone, Beetle, and Songbird, and so many other different characters who have been on the Thunderbolts way back in that earliest iteration. Back then, the whole swing with it was that they're superheroes, but actually, they were bad guys masquerading as superheroes. And over time, the Thunderbolts became this government operation back during the Dark Reign era, where it was basically criminals operating in a very Suicide Squad style manner. The team has evolved once more, this time not really being a Suicide Squad style team. This is actually a government sanctioned team this time around, only instead of being led by former mayor of New York, Wilson Fisk, it's now headed by the current mayor of New York, Luke Cage. Luke Cage has put this team together because Wilson Fisk has completely banned and outlawed vigilantes and superheroes in the city of New York. No superhero team can legally operate within its city limits. And right now, Luke Cage knows that a superhero team of some sort is needed now more than ever. And what he's decided to do is take Wilson Fisk Thunderbolts and get rid of all the trash that was in there before and replace them with something better. Real heroes who actually want to do hero shit. Now, granted, this is also not just being done by Luke Cage. This is also being handled by a public relations team as well, to make sure that optics look good and that they can make sure to stay on the right side of the mainstream media, as well as public opinion. They've run all the numbers, they focus tested all the names, and they came up with what they felt was the perfect team to take on supervillains in New York. Characters that would, while maybe not light you on fire as far as like how excited you may be to see them, but characters that wouldn't necessarily shake things up, characters that wouldn't necessarily scare anyone, characters with powers that would not yield quite as much destruction as, say, maybe a Hulk or a Captain Marvel or an Iron Man. So one of the first names that's going to pop up on this list is going to be Victor Alvarez, aka Power Man. If you're not as familiar with this character, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I thought Luke Cage was Power Man. But no, Power Man is a character who made his first appearance in Dark Reign: The List, Daredevil #1 back in 2009. Albeit, he wasn't quite a superhero just yet. He wouldn't technically take up the Power Man moniker and act as a superhero on that level until Shadowland Power Man #1 in 2010. But Victor Alvarez is a guy who can manipulate chi energy to enhance his own strength, speed, stamina, durability, as well as the physical attributes and powers of other people. He is powerful AF, but sadly, he's suffering from a bit of imposter syndrome. He's wanting to make his first impression the best first impression he could possibly make on this new Thunderbolts team, because this is really the first time he's been a part of a super team of this magnitude. Yeah, he's been on the Champions and he's worked alongside the Heroes for Hire and the Avengers, but he's never officially been a member of a team quite on this level. But something tells me some of the things that came up during the Champions Outlawed story arc, which was something that happened where technically he was mostly responsible for overloading Viv Vision to the point where she exploded and caused a ton of destruction that led to a lot of people being hurt and in some cases even killed. I feel like he's still trying to make up for that in some way, and I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime terribly soon, but I could definitely see them addressing some of those instances from Outlawed in future issues of Thunderbolts. Next up is going to be the character Kara Kilgrave, formerly known as the Purple Girl, but now currently known as Persuasion. Persuasion is a character who's actually been around for quite some time, and as her former name, Purple Girl, might imply, yes, she is the daughter of Zebediah Kilgrave, the Purple Man. She's a character that actually goes all the way back to Alpha Flight number 41 back in 1986, and while she's a character who's actually been around for quite some time, she actually hasn't been in as many comics that you would probably imagine for a character whose history goes back that far. But Kara has the exact same powers as her dad. She emits pheromones at all times that allow her to take advantage of people by being able to tell them to do something and them feeling compelled to do it. So basically mind control. And her ability to wield this is pretty much on par with her dad's. The only real difference between their powers is that anyone affected by her powers, you can tell because their skin will turn just as purple as hers. I don't really know exactly what's going on with Persuasion here. She doesn't really seem to have any underlying arc, but I definitely see that she's trying to push up on Ms. America, aka America Chavez, in this first issue. She is making her intentions with America very clear in this first issue alone. She's supposed to be the mentalist of the group. She's supposed to be the one to help calm down crowds, to help quickly diffuse situations where brute force would be problematic. She could talk someone down. She even does it in this issue by talking down the Abomination, albeit telling him to punch himself in the junk over and over again until he's in a submissive position, and then they can cart him off to wherever they choose to cart him off this week. And I was just talking about America Chavez, so let's bring up America Chavez. So for those unfamiliar, America Chavez is a character who possesses superhuman strength, speed, agility, durability, stamina, all that good stuff. She also has the ability to fly, and most importantly, I think which is her bread and butter power, is that she can punch, kick, headbutt, or otherwise forcefully rip holes into the space-time continuum in the form of star-shaped portals that can take her to anywhere in the past, present, or future, or anywhere else in the space-time continuum. She can literally go across the street, or she could travel to the other side of the world, or to an entirely different planet or reality altogether. That's basically the elevator pitch of her powers. If you want to know more about this character, actually I have a video already out breaking her down in her entirety up here, so go check that out. Now, one thing I will definitely say about America Chavez in this issue, the question actually does come up. Are her powers still in flux? Now, we do know that America Chavez is not just operating as a Thunderbolt, she's also operating as one of Blue Marvel's defenders. And during the course of that comic, it was made pretty clear that her powers are still waxing and waning. We saw this with America Chavez's most recent comic series. Her powers just weren't as reliable as she was used to them being. And in this comic, we learned, while it seems like her powers are back to being the way they were, we do discover her powers are still messing up here and there. She can still take bullets to the face and everything, but when she tries to use one of her portals, not only does the portal fail, but she ends up throwing up from how nauseous that it made her. So we still don't really know exactly what is going to be happening with her powers. Is this something that's going to be resolved in Al Ewing's Defenders Beyond, or is this something that's going to get resolved in Jim Zub's Thunderbolts? It's hard to say at this point. I think it's far more likely that we'll end up seeing the result of her powers being fixed in the Defenders Beyond series as opposed to this one, but I do feel like a good share of the drama surrounding her waning powers will come up here. Next up is going to be the character Guts and Glory. Guts and Glory is a new character who's very reminiscent of 90s era Cable, albeit this guy has a few less pouches and his guns aren't as comically oversized as Cable's were back then. He seems to possess some level of cybernetic augmentations. He's an expert in heavy weapons artillery, both low-tech and extremely advanced. Now, I will say there is something going on with his cybernetics. We see at a later point in this issue that his cybernetics start reacting in some way to something that's not really stated exactly what it is. And Helen Astrantia, who is the public relations advisor for the Thunderbolts, she makes it pretty clear that they don't really know anything about him, that they don't know his real name, they don't really know exactly what his powers are, they don't know where he came from, they don't really know anything about this guy, and what little bit they do know about him, they can't share, but he's keeping a secret from the rest of the group, and what it is, it's hard to say at this point. But I have a feeling whatever it is, it's something that would probably get him kicked off the team if the rest of the team knew. Or it probably could be nothing. It could probably be something kind of small and completely inconsequential that he's hiding for no reason, that if he just would have simply told the team, they probably wouldn't have cared. Last and most certainly not least is Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. Hawkeye, a guy who has long time been an Avenger. He has been a member of and both led the West Coast Avengers. He's also a former field leader of the Thunderbolts. So, I mean, yeah, he's kind of a no-brainer. He's a master archer. He's not necessarily like the most powerful Avenger in existence, but he definitely is a guy who you wouldn't mind having in charge, even though technically he doesn't quite trust himself. Now, granted, yes, he does have a little bit of a spotty past, but of any person from the Avengers you could have picked that was in Hawkeye's weight class, I can't think of too many other people that would have been better for it. Technically, before him was US Agent. He was the one operating as field leader for the Thunderbolts during the Devil's Reign event, and while they do have a nice little interaction between each other in this comic, a little bit of back and forth, I thought it was interesting. And technically, Luke Cage could have just as easily have put US Agent back on this team. Granted, he's thought of as more of a villainous character a lot of the times, but technically he's just really morally ambiguous. And I like how over the recent iterations of US Agent, he's kind of referred to as Captain Conservative. And while yeah, he was technically working undercover for the FBI infiltrating Wilson Fisk Thunderbolts before, US Agent is very likely not going to wind up being on this team, at least not right away. I could technically see him coming back later, or maybe, you know, some issues down the road, but yeah, he's not going to be in it. This is Hawkeye's show to run, and so far, it kind of seems like the team doesn't even really need him. Now, while Hawkeye is the field leader of this team, he wasn't actually Luke Cage's first pick for field leader of the Thunderbolts. It was actually Monica Rambeau, formerly known as Captain Marvel, formerly known as Pulsar, currently known as Spectrum, and we also know she's recently readopted the moniker of Photon. I say this because she also has a solo series coming up that's going to be written by Eve L. Ewing. And in that series, it is literally titled Photon, and it makes a pretty big deal about the fact that she's going back to that superhero name. So I don't really know what that means for her being Spectrum in this comic, because in this issue, she specifically says when Clint refers to her as Monica, she calls herself Spectrum, or at least when she's like this, she's known as Spectrum. So I don't know if she just bounces back and forth between names, just depending on how she feels at the time, or what's going to happen when this Photon series comes out here in December. Maybe there's going to be something that's going to happen that is going to lead to her taking that name back up, because yeah, here she's still calling herself Spectrum, but we know she's got a comic called Photon. I don't know. It's confusing. I'm sure we'll get a reasonable explanation for it somewhere down the stretch. But point of the matter is that Luke Cage, he didn't initially pick Hawkeye for this. The person that he wanted was Monica Rambeau, and the reason why is because Monica is somebody he trusts. He's worked alongside Monica Rambeau for quite some time. Not only have they worked together in the Avengers, they're good friends, but the thing is, Monica doesn't want to be a part of the team because, as she states in Devil's Reign Omega #1, that she doesn't want to be a part of a new superhero team. She doesn't want to be a leader anymore. She's been through it all before. She has led the Avengers before. She was also the head honcho during Next Wave Agents of Hate. She's been in charge before. She doesn't have it in her anymore, and she knows what Luke Cage is doing. She knows that there's going to be a lot of press and media involved in this, and she's not going to be the one to sit here and smile when she knows that things aren't right, and she doesn't want to be a part of that. And she knows that if she does this, if she chooses to stick to her guns, to be real and not put on a fake face for the cameras or whatever, she knows she's going to be depicted as, and I quote, the angry black woman. She knows that that's going to happen, especially with the media circus nature of what this new Thunderbolts team represents. This is how we wind up with Clint Barton as the leader of the group, because when Monica bows out, they have to come up with a new candidate. Now you're probably sitting here thinking to yourself, well, why doesn't Luke Cage just lead the team? Well, that's actually the funny part about it. He can't, not legally. He is still the mayor of New York City. He can't operate as a vigilante and be the mayor, even if it is sanctioned vigilantism. American law is kind of tricky that way. You can't be the mayor and going out and dishing out your own brand of vigilante justice. You also can't operate as the law itself. It's just the way things are. So regardless of the fact that Luke Cage is a superhuman, doesn't matter. He can't go out there and do that. It would actually probably be worse looking for the Thunderbolts if he did. They actually go through a list of other potential candidates for the Thunderbolts, all of which are people that would honestly not be bad picks. Picks like Dane Whitman, the Black Knight. We also see Sam Wilson, but right now Sam Wilson, he's busy operating as Captain America, so he's definitely out. They even bring up Bobby Morse, aka Mockingbird, which is funny considering that Mockingbird is Clint's ex-wife. They even bring up Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, and right now she's busy with some other things going on in her corner of the Marvel Comics universe. So what Helen lands on is Clint Barton, so he was actually the dead last pick to be on this team. And honestly, it was probably a better idea that Monica would have stepped up, but I totally get why she didn't. But now she is on the team. She actually is planning to hang around, but not as a leader. She's still not interested in leading the team, but she will be there to help out if and when she's needed, just like how Luke points out in this first issue that, yeah, you said you didn't want to be a part of this, but here you were. The second things were going wrong, you came in, you swooped in, and you took care of business. Just do that. And that's pretty much what Monica's there to do, which I kind of feel like this is going to be one of those deals where it's almost kind of like in real life when you take on a job and you don't really want any extra added responsibility, but you do such a good job at doing the few things that you're trusted to do that maybe you accidentally just look like you're going above and beyond the call of duty, that you're gonna wind up just getting thrown into a position of power regardless. I've seen that happen to people all the time. I've had it happen to myself when I was still a part of the normal workforce. I would say, nope, I don't want to be in management. I don't want to be in charge of anybody. And somehow, months later, I would wind up being the one holding the keys, making the schedule, and basically running the whole show. So I think that's kind of what's going to wind up happening, because right now, something's going on with Hawkeye. Something that actually calls back to his Freefall series from 2020 by Matthew Rosenberg and Otto Schmidt. Hawkeye had recently readopted the persona of Ronin when the Hood got out of jail thanks to Wilson Fisk. So Hawkeye started operating as the Ronin again and ended up inevitably slipping back into his old Ronin tactics. When Hawkeye has operated as the Ronin, he usually operates under extreme measures, kind of similar to what we saw of Hawkeye in Avengers Endgame when he was operating as Ronin. He was way more apt to kill people, and it was the same thing in the comics, but maybe even worse. When operating as the Ronin, Hawkeye is almost maybe one short and curly shy of being the Punisher. But this was something that actually put a lot of his Avengers allies and teammates and just friends in general kind of in a bad position, because we even see the point where Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes end up hitting him up, be like, hey, is this you? Like, they got pictures and surveillance of Ronin out here operating and killing people, and Clint is having to lie and say that it's not him. And while some of it was not him lying, because there were parts where he had life model decoys and even Skrull imposters working and operating as Ronin to keep the heat off of him, but he basically went back down a dark path that I feel like Hawkeye wasn't necessarily ready to go back down. And one I feel like even though he did walk back down, it's something he's not proud of, even to the point where if you get to the end of the Freefall series, I think one of the very last pages, there's a part where the supervillains that he was going after say, no, he's more like us than he wants to admit. And we see at the end of this issue, when Clint walks away from the mirror that he's staring at, we see his reflection staring back at him, and while it does take on more of a purple tint with the red eyes, part of me wonders if maybe this is calling back to some of that stuff that happened in Freefall. It honestly wouldn't be that far out of the realm of possibility. But another thing, just I guess, and maybe because of the tone, and maybe because we also have Kara Kilgrave involved in this, part of me wonders if Zebediah Kilgrave or even Persuasion herself is somehow responsible for this. It's hard to say at this point. Hawkeye is one of those characters I'm not like super duper mega informed on all of his comics history, but someone is clearly messing with him, and it's someone who maybe, at least based on the type of dialogue that's being written here, probably someone who is actually terribly familiar with it. Or who knows, maybe there's a Mirrorverse version of himself out there that's just coming back to haunt him. I'm not really 100% sure on this one. It's like the one thing in the comic I'm not 100% on, but I love this comics art. It's really good and off to an interesting start. It's definitely got a feather in its cap thanks to the fact that Monica Rambeau is on the book. I mean, yeah, hey, I always like it when Monica's on a super team. I can dig that. But also, I do like the fact that, they're putting together a roster that is not like any that we've seen, before, at least not in a while on the Thunderbolts. And I know while, yes, we do often see the comics and the MCU kind of mirror one another sometimes, it's not really as precise a science as a lot of people might think it is. Yes, there is very likely some correlation between the fact that the Thunderbolts are getting comics again now, while we have the Thunderbolts team name making the rounds for, the next phase of the MCU, but at the same same time, that doesn't really mean that the two are actually like in concert with one another. It's kind of like with the whole deal with, if you've been reading any of Kieran Gillen's Judgment Day, where the character Star Fox just recently reappeared, and while yes, that character is in the MCU now, even Kieran Gillen will tell you himself that his story and what's going on in the MCU have nothing to do with one another. So I would just like to taper some expectations. I don't want anybody thinking that, oh man, whatever they're doing here, this is what's gonna be in the MCU. Just don't expect that. But anyways, if you want to know more about characters like Monica Rambeau, check out this video up here. And if you want to know everything there is to know about America Chavez, check out this video down here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Thunderbolts #1. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.